What's the most unbelievable fact you've heard? Story 1. There were only 26 episodes of the original Scooby-Doo. Of all the things in this thread, this one got me. I suppose I haven't watched Scooby-Doo in over 30 years, but it just seemed like there would be hundreds of episodes. I feel like I was watching different episodes all the time as a kid. Crazy. Most Hanna-Barbera cartoons had an extremely short production cycle because they focused on the number of different shows instead of the number of episodes. What makes Scooby-Doo Where Are You feel longer is the sheer amount of continuous new Scooby shows they had until the late 80s. The original show ended after a year, but the brand never really went away, and was just constantly rebranded and restarted with a new series. As someone who has an autistic kid obsessed with the original Scooby-Doo, God, do I wish there were more. I have seen every episode so many freaking times. They like the other iterations, and there are so many other iterations, but nothing is quite like the original series. They are constantly dressed as Velma and dress up their little brother as Shaggy. We have a very Scooby household. But too few episodes aside, the show really holds up, and of all the cartoons to watch over and over, I'm actually pretty okay with it. Thematically, they look for the truth, and it's never actual monsters. The language holds up mostly, and the women are seen as competent equals. Story 2. Ancient Egypt lasted so long that ancient Egyptian archaeology was a career in ancient Egypt. To be fair, I believe US archaeology is a career in the US, and that country is just over 200 years old. The country was founded then, but humans have been in the Americas for over 30,000 years at least. There's more archaeology than just 200 years of human occupation. Egypt went for 3,100 years. Cleopatra is closer to our time than she is to the construction of the pyramids. A lot of archaeology could be done in just their civilization's reign alone, let alone any previous occupations to those areas. Well, that's only the recorded part. The larger pyramids and some of the original foundations are thought to be more like 30,000 years old. Similar story to ancient Greece. They built ancient Greece on the ruins of an even ancienter Greece. They have also discovered entire cities carved out of limestone underground, thought to be up to 100,000 years old. It's been around a while. Most of it got wiped out through the Ice Age, though. Story 3. The last execution by guillotine in France occurred the same year Star Wars was released. Yet another guillotine fact: although it's sometimes associated with brutal and cruel executions, it was actually invented as a humane alternative to the gallows and other pretty slow and grisly methods. Weirdly, Christopher Lee witnessed the last public execution by guillotine in France, who played Count Dooku in the prequels. From his Wikipedia page, on his way there, he stopped briefly in Paris where he stayed with the journalist Webb Miller, a friend of Rose, and witnessed Eugen Wiedemann's execution by guillotine, the last public execution performed in France. Story 4. There is more hydrogen in 1 gallon of gasoline than there is in 1 gallon of liquid hydrogen. Density. The carbon atoms pack the hydrogens closer, whereas a gallon of liquid hydrogen has a lower packing ratio. Notice OP didn't say a kilogram of gasoline versus a kilogram of liquid hydrogen. In that case, the gasoline would have a smaller number of hydrogens, as each carbon weighs about 12 times the hydrogens, but the carbons would make up a substantial amount of the mass. This is like the question, which weighs more, a kilogram of marshmallows or a kilogram of gold? They weigh the same, but the marshmallows would be much bigger. This fact is in reverse. Same volume, different mass. Congratulations, this is the first fact I've read where I don't think there's any way that that can be true. Like, how does that even work? I get gasoline is probably denser than liquid hydrogen, but how can it be so much denser that it can pack hydrogen plus other stuff more tightly than just hydrogen? The extra density is part because of the extra hydrogen. Like, take a bunch of building blocks and haphazardly throw them in a bin. Now take the same building blocks and carefully stack them in a bin. Which one results in more blocks in the same bin? Story 5. A full-size basketball court can fit inside a soccer penalty box. Still amazes me. Football, soccer, pitches aren't standardized either. In the English Premier League, Nottingham Forest's pitch is 105 times 71 meters, giving it an area of 7,455 square meters, whilst Fulham's is the smallest at 100 times 65 meters. That gives it an area of 6,500 square meters, meaning it is 14% smaller. They can actually go as low as 90 by 45 meters, an area of 4,050 square meters, or as high as 120 times 90 meters, which is 10,800 square meters. I believe the biggest in professional football is the Spanish club LAKEY at 108 times 70 meters, an area of 7,560 square meters. In Italy, Naples has the longest, I think, at 110 meters. Stoke City was forced to enlarge theirs when playing in European games, as their pitch was too small for European regulations. I believe they played on their standard-size pitch for domestic games. You could even see the faded markings where the grounds crew had tried to rub them off. In 2000, Wales played a friendly against Brazil and shortened the width of the pitch by a few yards to counter Brazil's winger advantage. They also let the grass grow out, so passing was more difficult, although they lost 3-0. Tottenham Hotspur, when waiting for their new stadium to be built, played almost all their home games for 2 seasons at Wembley. They originally asked for the pitch, one of the biggest in England, to be shortened. This was denied. Although they'd go on to finish 3rd and 4th in those seasons, but who knows what would have happened if a few yards were trimmed off. For reference, an American football pitch is 91 by 49 meters. 4,459 square meters. Okay, I had to stop and think on this one. Pretty wild. It makes sense though. My wife was commenting on how soccer players are absolutely jacked, even though it looks like most of them are just jogging back and forth the majority of the game. And then you look at the size of the field. Imagine having to casually jog that distance back and forth for the length of a normal match. Sheesh. The craziest thing that I see there is that none of the venues for high-end basketball give their athletes room to safely play or use the perimeter space on courts. They universally pack crowds in seated feet from the court. When a player wants to use their skill/abilities to retrieve/play a ball headed out of bounds, they fly into the thick-seated humans and steal shrubberies that pack every competitive court, both courtside and top and bottom of courts. If courts were built to accentuate gameplay and players' abilities, the court space would more resemble a hockey rink with benches, seating, officials' table, and broadcasters elevated and spaced back about 12 feet from the court. Then the perimeter would surrounded by soft padding raising up 7 to 8 feet to the court/spectator barrier line around the whole court, giving the perimeter more of a bowl look rather than a hockey rink. Such a layout would let the players go airborne out of bounds to retrieve and save/pass balls, really making way for amazing plays without crippling attendees and themselves crashing into seated people. I don't get how the current paradigm has lasted 40 to 50 years into super athletic and dynamic basketball players filling the league. I get it for the early game development when the game wasn't as wild, because they had more average-looking athletes passing the ball around instead of the genetic mutants, svelte and athletic giants taking over all the high-end leagues going airborne and playing above the rim. Story 6. Sharks existed before trees did. I didn't believe you, and I'm sorry. Sharks have been around for hundreds of millions of years, with fossils showing their ancestors appeared around 450 million years ago. In comparison, the earliest tree fossils are around 350 million years old. Well, the title is, "Oh fuck off, there's no way that's true, LOL." Time-based facts are my favorite just because of how absurd they can be on scales of thousands or millions of years. Some other fun ones: we live closer in time to the T-Rex than the T-Rex lived to the Stegosaurus. Or Cleopatra lived closer to the opening of the first Pizza Hut than the building of the pyramids. Life on the ocean simply had a lot longer to develop, land being quite harsh. Sharks are not that much younger than the earliest terrestrial plant fossils we find, with sharks being around 450 MYA, probably less for what we'd consider a shark, whilst earlier known land plant fossils, plant spores, are 475 MYA. Though some scientists wonder they might be over 700 MYA, they just didn't get preserved as they were too simple. When sharks arose and the oceans were rich and well-developed ecosystems, I'd imagine land habitat were mostly rocky with maybe some green sludge and fungi growing here and there, though plants might be older, we just don't know. Story 7. Woolly mammoths did not go extinct until 1,000 years after the Great Pyramids of Giza were built. I'll add my crazy facts to yours since it fits the theme. Cleopatra was born closer to today than to the completion of the Great Pyramids. If you specify the Great Pyramids, it's probably quite a bit less than 1,000 years, but yeah, the fact mammoths are alive at all at the time is trippy. The Great Pyramids were built about 2600 BC, the Wrangel Island mammoth population probably died out at 2500 to 2000 BC. For anyone interested, these were very small, isolated populations of mammoths in Siberia and islands off the coast that were likely barely clinging on and getting steadily sicker each generation from having a very small gene pool. The majority of them had died out some 10,000 years beforehand. They found fossils in the Central Valley of California. They found them in the dump, so they had to stop dumping there and then dug the whole thing back up. There are now mammoth decorations on the bridge of Highway 99, but not a lot of people know that they were found there. Story 8. Orcas are a natural predator of moose. Are moose even real? I've never seen one. I know people in Maine, including hunters, and some who have had moose permits, who have never seen one. At this point, I'm starting to wonder if it's a big hoax made up by the Maine Tourism Council, and some other northern states were like, yo, that's a cool idea. Worked for Nessie. Story 9. Humans and their livestock are 95% plus of mammalian biomass on Earth, which is still a small fraction of the biomass on Earth. Plants make up 83% of the Earth's biomass, animals less than 0.5%, humans and their livestock account for 6% of that animal biomass. Animals, including humans, also run when it comes to life on Earth, and mammals also run when it comes to animals. Arthropods rule with almost 50% of animal biomass. Plants rule. And once you start including autochemotrophic bacteria, saturating the rock in the crust down for kilometers, it looks like they outmass life ultimately powered by sunlight by 10 to 1 or even more. When you adapt to your environment instead of altering it radically, and when you don't engage in wars, you can be much more successful in the long run. You only exist because plants radically changed the environment. There was no free oxygen until plants liberated it, which caused mass extinctions of vast numbers of species for which oxygen at those levels was hugely toxic, but in turn allowed the evolution of high-energy consuming things like fungi and animals. The idea that man is the only thing that has radically altered the environment is completely wrong. The flora and fauna we see today are the result of intense competition between species and side effects from the evolution of some species that regularly include mass extinctions. There are no morals in evolution, just outcomes. Story 10. We live closer in time to the Tyrannosaurus rex than the Tyrannosaurus rex lived to the Stegosaurus. Known for the large plates on its back, as well as its walnut-sized brain, Stegosaurus is one of the most well-known dinosaurs in modern pop culture. Hailing from the Jurassic, this animal has often been depicted as the main adversary of the Tyrannosaurus rex, but this is an anachronistic impossibility, as Stegosaurus went extinct almost 100 million years before Tyrannosaurus appeared. A more likely predator was its contemporary, the Allosaurus. The popular species known as Stegosaurus was one of many other species in the family of Stegosauridae, which included a diverse group of creatures of varying sizes, sporting a variety of spikes and plates. I went to a place recently with a dinosaur exhibit. It had a whole lot of models of dinosaurs showing the relative size and a little plaque saying what they ate and when they lived, etc. I caught myself once thinking, those ones lived quite close together, because there's only 50 million years between them, or something, and then I realized how ridiculous that was. Story 11. Hannibal Lecter only has 16 minutes of screen time in Silence of the Lambs. It's actually very common for supporting characters to have relatively little screen time. Lecter still has quite a lot in that movie in relation to most characters who aren't Clarice. I think a lot of the surprise there is that it's assumed he's the main character of the movie when he's just an important part of it. Thinking about this, and about Vader in Star Wars also getting so little screen time, that makes sense. Familiarity breeds contempt. They're always there as a kind of brooding presence in the background, even when they're not on screen. That's how you build tension. Every good monster movie in the history of cinema knows this. Jaws, Alien, they're masterclass in it. It's not about the monster, it's about how everyone else impacted by the monster is reacting to it. I'm still mad about this trivia night I went to 4 years ago. The question was, who was the main villain in The Silence of the Lambs? I said Buffalo Bill, and didn't get a point. I tried showing proof and asked the dude if he remembered Ted Levine in the role. Nope. It puts the lotion on its skin. Nothing. He maintained that it was Hannibal Lecter. I'm still salty. Story 12. The largest air force in the world is the US Air Force. The second largest air force in the world is the US Navy. This reminds me of a Civil War one. The largest city in the Confederacy was New Orleans. The second largest city in the Confederacy was wherever the Union Army of the Potomac happened to be camped. That implicitly says a lot about the US Navy. Other countries may have lots of subs, frigates, or destroyers, but the US has so many aircraft carriers that our carrier alone competes with our Air Force bases for real estate and basic functions. You've got 10 airports in one country? Fine, we've got 15 airports parked off the beach of your country. We have a bigger air presence in your airspace than you do. A few years ago, some of my father-in-law's acquaintances traveled to the United States. They were expecting a kid at that time, and they supposedly decided on the name while on the trip. They saw a ship with an incredible name they claimed. The baby was named Usnavi. Imagine being named after the goddamn US Navy. For a solid bit after World War II, one of the largest pushes for common sense reform was eliminating the redundancy of having the two largest air forces. We only need one, so let's get rid of the Air Force and boom, we still have the biggest air force in the world. This was what all the MBAs of the world thought. Eliminating the middleman of separate departments consolidates everything under one chain of command, and everyone sort of agreed there was no way we would keep the same size of military, we just needed to fight the largest war in human history, right? Then the Air Force came through with, what about nuclear war though? And that shut everyone up. So we still have them. Story 13. If you're 7 feet tall, you have a 1 in 6 chance of landing in the NBA. I like how this sounds cautionary, as though it can spontaneously happen to some tall dude on his way to pick up some drywall from Home Depot on a random Saturday. A true 7-foot teenager would absolutely be kidnapped by a high school basketball coach, no matter how fat or spindly or weird they are. They don't even need to play basketball, just stand under the hoops and scare the crap out of the other team. A guy from my city was 7 feet tall and absolutely hated basketball, but it got him a full scholarship to a top-tier academic school, so he did what he had to do. I remember talking to him the summer before we all left, and he was like, just 4 more years of this crap. Yeah, but can we please stop telling kids this? I had a 7-foot-tall clumsy mess of a student who decided that he didn't have to get good grades because an NBA scout would see him and he'd be set for life. He didn't even play basketball in high school. 4 years of telling him to have a backup plan, and it was still a shock that his crappy grades and tallness didn't get him a winning ticket. He did end up as a lead music teacher at a national music retailer, but if he had worked 20% harder at that in high school, it wouldn't have taken him 10 years to get to that point. Honestly, if he'd at least played high school basketball, he might have been right. But you do at least have to do the bare minimum to beat out 5 other tall guys, and good enough at math to figure out what that is. It was absolutely maddening. And he tested well above average intelligence. That might have been the issue. He thought athletes were morons, so his low grades wouldn't matter if he showed them his SAT scores and his height. I even brought up the fact that no talent scout would even know who he was, due to him not playing basketball. It didn't matter. His parents were going through their own train wreck for 4 years, but you'd think at some point they would have been like, hey, how are you getting from no experience to pros? Story 14. Koalas' entire diet is eucalyptus tree leaves, which are incredibly toxic. Baby koalas aren't born with any immunity to the toxins. They gain this by eating their mother's poop. Doesn't this mean they didn't physically evolve to do this, but rather they evolved to host the bacteria that evolved to digest the leaves? Do you mean that if you raised a baby koala on a different diet, it would technically be able to survive and possibly thrive? Or did other parts of their physiology evolve to depend on the leaves? Koalas are one of the extremely rare examples of animals that haven't gone extinct exclusively because of human intervention. If we never came to Australia or just ignored them, they'd have gone extinct. We're the reason those critters exist, and why frogs, which are evolutionarily nigh unkillable, are going extinct. Like, damn, instead of saving the animal which should have gone extinct by now, why don't we focus that effort on saving animals that are more important to our ecosystem? Like frogs or wild bees. Side note on that, if you ever want to support a charity about saving the bees, do a lot of research on each organization. There's a lot of honeybee farming corporations that are using that charity about the bees are dying to support their honeybees, which are thriving. Hell, honeybees are actually part of the problem as they're an invasive species in a lot of places, which is killing of wild bees, which are the ones in danger, and consequently killing a ton of plants, which honeybees don't pollinate. This kind of stuff is actually pretty common in charities, especially nonprofits, because they can be used to avoid paying taxes, effectively whitewashing money. A few other notable examples of horrid charities that front as helping but are only helping themselves or worse are Autism Speaks. They're eugenicists and want autistic people dead. Story 15. A million seconds is 12 days. A billion seconds is 31 years. That's the difference between a millionaire and a billionaire. Tom Scott did a video with a similar demonstration, traveling the distance of $1 bills stacked on their side. The bills are about 1/10 of a millimeter, and he travels $1 million on a very short wander around a car park. Then he gets into a car and goes for a drive for over an hour, most of it on motorways, which are 70 miles per hour roads, to reach a billion. I prefer this one. If you're relatively successful and make $100 an hour, you'll make $1 million every 5 years. If you start saving every dime you make at that rate, and you started around the time the pyramids began construction, you would still not be a billionaire. If you want to adjust the effect for different audiences, making $250 an hour since the birth of Christianity would not make you a billionaire. $2,000 an hour since the Revolutionary War would put you on the cusp of billionaire status. $1,000 an hour since the discovery of the New World would barely make you a billionaire. Story 16. The Sun contains 99% of the solar system's mass. This is part of the reason why it's so hard to make a fully accurate scale model of the solar system. Either the Sun has to be unbelievably massive to properly match the planets, or the planets have to be microscopic, not to mention that the distances between the objects are, well, astronomical, so if you want to scale the distance along with it, either you've got planets that are countries over and visible, or again, they're in the same room and invisible to the naked eye. Story 17. Unfrosted Pop-Tarts have more calories than the frosted Pop-Tarts. So you're telling me that the frosting has negative calories and therefore I can lose weight if I eat only the frosting? There is a plausible reason, actually. It is the fact that every Pop-Tart has to be the same general size, so the frosted ones have less bread material than the unfrosted ones, and the frosting has fewer calories than the bread material. At least, that's the most logical explanation I can think of. I mean, people should just be able to read nutritional information, but this is an example of why people struggle with diets. Not that Pop-Tarts should be part of a healthy diet. It's like how wraps have been marketed forever as a healthier option, but wraps have more calories than the sandwich version. The other reason people struggle with weight loss is that there has got to be a better answer than just permanently eating less. There are a million different ways to eat fewer calories, and they all work. None of them are nearly as much fun as eating whatever you want whenever you want. Or at least that's been my experience. I've always thought that Al Gore's sequel to An Inconvenient Truth should focus on obesity. Story 18. Greenland sharks can live up to 500 years. They don't reach sexual maturity until they are over 100 years old. When they get pregnant, gestation lasts up to 18 years. This fact being crazy to us is probably how cats and dogs feel towards humans. They're pregnant for 9 months? I got pregnant, gave birth, raised my pups, and sent them off to new homes in less than 6 months. Counterfact, the oldest Greenland shark found was estimated to be around 300 to 500 years old, which is where that figure comes from. But radiocarbon dating puts it at roughly 370 to 400 years old. Still the longest living vertebrae that we know of, but not 500 plus years old. Story 19. If you earned $5,000 an hour, 24 hours a day from the time the pyramids in Egypt were constructed until today, the world's richest man would still have more money than you. The richest man would be worth more, but most of that is tied to shareholdings, which aren't exactly liquid, which is why you could be worth $200 billion plus and still need a $13 billion loan to buy a company, like let's say Twitter. Story 20. If the Andromeda Galaxy wasn't dim in our night sky, it would appear about 6 times as big as the Moon. This fact also applies to various other space objects. Andromeda is 2.5 million light-years away, so we're seeing it as if it existed 2.5 million years ago. A comparison I like to make for people is if there were a sentient species with far advanced technology to build a telescope that could see the surface of Earth in our galaxy, that species would see humanity as Homo habilis rather than Homo sapiens. If I understand correctly, the only reason that we know that space isn't infinite and hasn't been around for an infinite amount of time is because there's darkness in the night sky. Otherwise, there would be nothing but light in the night sky from the infinite amount of stars that have infinitely been sending light towards us. 21. It was only 66 years from the Wright brothers' first flight to Armstrong walking on the moon. I love aviation stats like that. The F-14 Tomcat served for roughly 30 years. When it entered the fleet in the mid-70s, the main carrier fighter 30 years before that had been the F-6F Hellcat. I have another one for you. Germany invented the jet plane in World War II, and we have a video of the Allies' reaction to seeing it for the first time. They were scared and in disbelief at how fast it went. Neil Armstrong was also 17 years old before the last Wright brother passed away. Pretty wild to think of a universe where their paths crossed and the first person to fly and the first person to walk on the moon could have had a full conversation or relationship. Buzz Aldrin's father knew Orville Wright. He studied under Robert Goddard, who invented liquid fuel rockets that revolutionized rocket power. He married a woman called Marion Moon. He is close to many of the big pioneers and inventions of flight and rocketry. It's very nearly a true fact because the first person to fly had a relationship/conversation, or at least was around the family, with the second person to land on the moon. The B-52 Stratofortress strategic bomber was first designed in the mid-1950s, and due to its success as a bomb delivery platform, the Air Force is continuing to sustain and modernize the fleet, and they are looking to push its operational functionality beyond the 2020s. What other military weapon system, short of the tank or the bullet/artillery shell, has been in use for 70 years in its almost original form? That's like taking Eddie Rickenbacker's Lafayette Escadrille Sopwith Camel into an A2A combat against MiG-28s in the 1980s. Story 22. Oxford University is older than the Aztec Empire. When Oxford was founded, the Maori were still 2 centuries off before they had discovered and settled in New Zealand. The Aztecs really were Johnny-come-lately in the cruel overlord world. The United States has been in existence longer than the Aztec Empire was. The Aztecs fell a few years short of their bicentennial. Damn Spaniards. They muscled the Aztecs out of their own protection racket. Furthermore, there was no Aztec Empire. The people were known as the Mexica, but because written out it looks like the same as modern-day people of Mexico, i.e. Mexican, some white professors, ironically enough, though not from Oxford, decided to call them Aztecs after their city, Aztlan. Story 23. Wayne Gretzky is the only player to score 200 points in a season, and he did it 4 times. He would be the NHL's all-time points leader if he had never made a goal. He has more assists than the next best has assists plus goals. Interestingly, the Gretzky brothers are also the highest scoring set of siblings. The non-famous one scored something like 12 goals in his life. The fastest player to 1,000 points is Gretzky. Second fastest, also Gretzky with his other 1,000. He is the only player with over 2,000 points as well. Gretzky's stats never cease to amaze me. What gets me is that Gretzky is not only the fastest to 1,000 points in 424 games, he's also the second fastest, as he went on to score another 1,000 in another 433 games, and then came close to doing it again before he retired, scoring another 867 points in another 630 games. The next fastest player to reach 1,000 points is Mario Lemieux, who did it in 513 games. There are only 98 players ever who surpassed 1,000 points during their career, by the way, and Gretzky did it twice, both in record time, and came close to doing it a third. Yay, Gretzky stats! Gretzky holds 10 scoring titles, the most in league history. He won the scoring title by more than 70 points 6 times. The largest point difference between first and second was in 83-84 when Gretzky outscored teammate Paul Coffey by 79 points. If you remove Gretzky, the next largest point differential between first and second in a season is Mario Lemieux by 31 points in 88-89. Gretzky became the NHL's all-time point leader at the age of 27. When I was about 9, I lived in LA and met him and a couple of other Kings players very briefly. I had watched a few hockey games but didn't know much. When he shook my hand and greeted me, it felt like he was a completely different kind of human somehow. He just seemed to know everything that was going on around him, everything that would be said, etc. I started studying him and he was pretty much my hero throughout my entire childhood. That dude was always about 2 steps ahead in time. Story 24. that paracetamol treats heartbreak pain, emotional pain, as it does physical pain. What the hell? Is this why I feel so good after taking it? I don't think I'm in any emotional pain, but it makes me feel awesome and happy. Be very careful taking painkillers regularly. My doctors think this contributed to my developing IBD, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I used to take them a lot for migraines and headaches to the point I carried them around and took them almost daily. Not a smart move as a teen, but I felt much better at the time. Related, you can actually be diagnosed with a broken heart. Takotsubo cardiomyopathy causes similar symptoms to a heart attack and results from severe emotional distress, like the loss of a loved one. Takotsubo means octopus trap, a special type of jar that resembles the ballooning of the left heart ventricle that results from the disorder. Story 25. If global fraud were consolidated into a single entity, it would be the third largest financial entity in the world behind the USA and China. Story 26. Rock hyraxes, also called rock dassies or rock rabbits, are small, stub-tailed rabbit-like animals native to Africa. Though they resemble rodents, their closest living relatives are actually elephants and manatees. I remember I was in Cape Town, South Africa, near Simonstown, where they have a couple of these guys chilling around. Then this tourist couple, sounding British and all, were looking at it and being like, "OMG, what the fuck is that rat?" And I gave them a TLDR of the above fact, and they just looked at me funny and walked away. I continued on to the penguins after my defeated attempt at a conversation. Afrotherians as a whole are super interesting. My favorites are the otter shrews, which resemble otters but are not closely related to them, or to shrews, and golden moles, which look super weird and are not related closely to actual moles. Story 27. Nintendo was founded in 1889. They were a card game company. Similar story for Nokia, the legendary mobile phones of the 90s and 2000s. I have two other Nokia products in my home, a pair of rubber boots and the tires on my car. The company was founded in 1865. Nintendo is still the #1 producer of Hanafuda cards in the world. They can be found in specialty hobby shops and myriad places online, including Amazon. They produce 3 types of sets: Flowers of the Capital, Tengu, and President. The only difference between them is the quality of the cards and packaging. The price difference is pretty small, so I recommend the President set. They also make a Mario-themed set, which I haven't looked at, but based on the box appears to be the worst Flowers of the Capital level of quality. Quite a while ago, they made a different Mario set available as a Club Nintendo reward, which I do have a copy of that, featured better Mario-themed art, and was of President quality. Story 28. Venus is the closest planet to Earth, at its shortest distance, not surprising. However, the planet that Earth spends the most percentage of time close to is Mercury, due to the Mars and Venus sometimes being on the other side of the Sun, which may also not be surprising. The kicker is that Mercury is also the closest planet to every other planet, from Venus all the way to Neptune, and yes, even Pluto. My other favorite Venus factoid is that since its orbit is inside ours, you can't look at it without also looking towards the sun, and because of that, we'll never see all of Venus. We will only ever see a crescent, because some part of the dark side is always facing us. It's also why it tends to be called the morning star, because you can only see it at dawn or dusk. My favorite Venus fact is that a day on Venus is longer than a year on Venus, as it takes longer for Venus to make a single revolution, 243 Earth days, than it does for Venus to make it around the Sun once, 224 Earth days. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again.